And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 75 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this first day of February in 2024. Hopefully we'll get some better weather than we got in January where it rained, 22 out of 23 days or some nonsense like that. But if you're checking out episode 75 on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, and are enjoying the content, don't forget to click like, subscribe, flip on those notifications. Or if you're catching up with episode 75 on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same rule applies. Click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So kind of dovetailing a bit from the last episode, which dealt with the kind of fitness miracle and the importance of fitness, not just physically, but mindset. I'm going to talk about some famous performers, actors, actresses in Hollywood who either underwent radical fitness regimens to change their physique or body in one way or another. In most cases, it was to put on weight, but in many cases, it was to lose weight. And then you get into other kind of areas about where if people don't do it the right way, they could suffer permanent damage. And it is certainly an issue in Hollywood now with, for example, Christian Bale, who's pulled off more transformations than, offhand, the average, even big fan of him could count. But it is said that there are certain actors and actresses over time who give all of themselves to a role, regardless of the amount of money they make or the amount of time, for example, they spend in the makeup chair or how many hours a day they're in the trailer doing nothing. When we think of the famous names who fully committed, or in some cases overcommitted to a role, the first name that comes to mind is actually not Christian Bale. It's Mr. De Niro, Bobby D, the Oscar winner, the extraordinary actor who is still very much active, nominated for supporting actor for Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. De Niro was somebody who in the 70s, when he was kind of in his, if you want to say heyday, he's done great work in every decade, but it's different. And people who know De Niro that have not seen his earlier work, this is a cliche, but it's true. There are people who only know De Niro as an older actor, as a guy in his 60s and 70s, playing father, dirty grandpa, whatever it is. And if they've not been exposed to movies like Taxi Driver or Raging Bull or even Mean Streets, they'll be pretty surprised. First off, it's always a shock to see somebody that your identification with is that they are old, and suddenly you say, holy shit, what is he, like 30 here? I might not have recognized him. But De Niro in Taxi Driver did not undergo necessarily physical transformation to play the part of lonely, very fucked up Vietnam vet, we assume. Well, we know he's a vet. We just don't know the particulars. Travis Bickle. And I've argued elsewhere that De Niro's turn as Bickle is one of the handful of truly transcendent film performances in the history of cinema. If somebody says, give me your top 25 best performances, I'm probably putting Bobby D at number one for that role. But that particular role, he didn't transform himself physically. Like, he didn't put on weight. He didn't, and this is not a criticism. There have been films where actors took some, pharmaceutical enhancements to get a lot bigger in terms of musculature. There's nothing wrong with that. You do what you got to do. I remember Mickey Rourke, he didn't come out and say, yeah, I took 3 different kinds of anabolics. No, but when he was asked about, and Mickey Rourke is another guy who is known for his physique, even in his later years. You check him out on social media, his face doesn't look great because of all the plastic surgery, I know, but physically he looks dynamite. And Mick is, how old is he? 70? He's 70 now? Maybe he's turning 70. Either way, he's up there and he still looks fantastic physically. But he was, when talking about the movie The Wrestler, he looks at least 40 or 50 pounds heavier. He said, I did what I had to do. He didn't beat the reporter over the head for asking the question, but that was his answer. He didn't need to go into any more detail. It's good enough. I did what I had to do, play that role. And many people felt he should have won the Oscar for Best Actor. He ended up with just a nomination, but that's neither here nor there. But in Taxi Driver, the preparation De Niro did was not the physical fitness preparation in either direction. It was this. De Niro got a credential, and this is something you can Google. You can find this for yourself. He started pushing a cab in New York City overnights, and he was already a successful actor. Bear in mind, Godfather 2 had come out already. Mean Streets had come out. De Niro had already won an Oscar, for fuck's sake, supporting Godfather 2, right? So this was not an actor looking to prove himself. This was somebody who'd already made it, was already very well respected. I mean, Godfather 2 hit, and there were people who maybe they hadn't seen Mean Streets who were absolutely gobsmacked by what De Niro was able to do as, the young Don Vito Corleone. And to this day, there are many people that will say that's his finest film acting, in that role, the young Don. But he drove a cab overnight, maybe during the day too, but the story was that he was doing it to try to mirror the character and what the character was doing. So when the cameras began rolling, when he began inhabiting the life of this very unfortunate soul named Travis Bickle, he felt like the character. He had an understanding of what this life might be like. Now, he didn't have the trauma of presumably being badly wounded in Vietnam, and maybe he was a little bent before that, but it comes through in the performance. De Niro, especially in that decade, was never less than authentic. You never got the feeling that he was playing to the camera. He was just basically, he was the person. And it's as if he became Travis Bickle, God's lonely man. Now, the physical transformation that De Niro was most famous for was as Jake LaMotta in his next collaboration with Martin Scorsese, Raging Bull, which is a movie that I respect, similar to Goodfellas, and the late, great film critic who I had a lot of issues with, but she was great, even if I thought some of her reviews were fucking stupid, batshit wrong. But Pauline Kael, who adored Brian De Palma, of that generation of directors, I believe she felt that De Palma was the most talented. She was a huge De Palma fan. She loved Spielberg. She had issues with a number of his films. She loved Spielberg. And she respected the hell out of Scorsese, even if she didn't always give a glowing endorsement. But her quote about Martin Scorsese was so accurate. He makes movies about people we wouldn't want to ever meet in real life. You would never, when you sure as fuck wouldn't want to meet Jimmy the Gent Conway from Goodfellas. Jimmy the Gent. Hey, Maury, you sure know how to bust balls. No. Jake LaMotta was a great fighter. He was a middleweight titan. Fought Sugar Ray Robinson 6 times. Nobody wanted to fight Sugar Ray. LaMotta, send me back in there with Ray. Let's go. 6 times. Beat Robinson once, which is extraordinary in and of itself, because Robinson had a long prime and near prime. He was a tough out for anybody. And the general sense among boxing fans, if you ask 100 people who know the history of boxing, not people who immediately will say Canelo or, Oscar De La Hoya, or even people who would say, hey, Tyson Fury or one of the Klitschko brothers, Sugar Ray Robinson is generally regarded to be the greatest boxer who ever lived. LaMotta not only defeated him once, he fought him to a standstill a bunch of times. And the movie Raging Bull is about the Bronx Bull. He was from the Bronx, Jake LaMotta, hence Raging Bull. And De Niro didn't just lose weight for the part. He didn't just get into what appeared to be fighting trim. Because there have been plenty of boxing movies, and this is not a criticism, Will Smith did some sparring for the Ali movie. He looked fantastic. He looked the part. And, Daniel Day-Lewis did a lot of heavy stuff for the movie The Boxer with Jim Sheridan, who he had made In the Name of the Father a few years earlier. De Niro didn't just look the part. He trained for the part. And all of the scenes with LaMotta, De Niro as LaMotta, in Fighting Trim, for the part of his career where he was always in shape. And it's one of those things with boxing. It's not something the average person would think of. But when you're a heavyweight, you have a tremendous amount of latitude as far as the weight you can come in. And as I say, Tyson Fury, people joke around because Tyson Fury's weight yo-yos, and maybe from a cardio standpoint, the various fights that Tyson Fury had with Deontay Wilder and, Otto Wallen and some of the other guys that he fought, if he ever were to go, like Anthony Joshua. But it doesn't matter if Tyson Fury is 285 in one fight and 297 in another, and if he's 302, it doesn't matter because he's not hitting a weight limit. The problem with the divisions like the middleweight division, like light heavyweight, even cruiser, one notch below heavyweight, you go over the limit, you're fucked. And it is a thing in the movie that LaMotta keeps having trouble making weight because he was naturally a bigger man. He had to fight, no pun intended, to keep himself at a certain weight. And he was a man who had enormous appetites. He loved food. Keep eating, you fat bastard. Joe Pesci as his brother. That's good. Keep eating. All you gotta do is stop eating, Jack. Stop eating. It's a great scene. He's trying to fix a TV. He's got like a hoagie sandwich about this big, and he has a fight coming up. And his stomach is hanging out over his boxer shorts. It looks like shit. They shot all of the scenes with De Niro near that weight that LaMotta fought at, which would have been, I believe, 154 would have been the limit, if I'm not mistaken, or it could have been 160. I'm not sure. Now that I'm thinking about it, I believe that it was 160 because they were less, now they call it alphabet soup. And they, the weight class, there's more weight classes, light middleweight, super middleweight. It was more straightforward back then. But De Niro got into this shape, and similar, again, to Daniel Day-Lewis, there were people involved in that production and boxers that worked with De Niro that said, and we all know, I shouldn't say we all know, De Niro happens to be a terrific athlete. But they said that he could have been a boxer, that he had the speed and the natural athleticism, that if he had picked it up at a younger age, he could have been a contender, could have been somebody instead of nobody, which is what I am. But at a certain point in that production, when they shot all of the scenes with De Niro, either in Fighting Trim or just above it, in some of the scenes like what I was talking about, it's a famous scene with Coffee, he loses his temper. Jake LaMotta was always losing his temper. Oh, I should also point out, my father, maybe the single favorite moment of any movie for my dad, is the moment in Raging Bull where De Niro's character is very, very agitated. He's waiting for his first wife she's making a steak, waiting for her to finish the steak. And it's taken a long time. And he's not a guy who has any patience. He has a horrible temper and he has zero patience. And he says, what are you doing? You're overcooking it. And she's trying to be helpful. She says, no. It's still red in the middle. Honey, I'm trying to do this right. And then De Niro, he goes, bring it over. Bring it over. How long I gotta wait? Bring it over. Bring it over here. Single favorite movie moment. Dad used to do that. At any time in history, when I was in my 20s, 30s, 40s, if I happened to be over at his house, he's sitting at the table, even when I was still living with him, he'd say, can I get some water? Yeah. And even if I was not hesitating or I'm on my phone, I would walk to the fridge and he would just randomly go, bring it over here. So at a certain point, production shut down and De Niro put on 60 pounds to play later era, post-retirement, still trying to earn a buck, Jake LaMotta. And De Niro was he 35? 35, 36 at the time. And they put like a nose on him. I think there was a little bit of a prosthetic nose. But he looked like hell. He looked way older than his real age, and I don't think they did any makeup tricks. The weight gain alone, remembering how tight he looked. And all of a sudden, he's this, I hate to say it, this real sloppy mess of a guy who had been so controlled in the ring. Yes, he had the rage, but this was somebody who was a champion. He was middleweight champion of the world and an incredible competitor. You know, the famous scene in the movie where it was called the St. Valentine's Day or Valentine's Day Massacre. I think it was February 14, 1951. 40 years before Silence of the Lambs was released to theaters. There's some great random trivia that has nothing to do with this. Silence of the Lambs is a movie released on Valentine's Day. But the sixth and final fight, I believe it was, between Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta, Robinson just absolutely beat the brakes off of Jake. It was a competitive fight, but at a certain point, Robinson's just sheer talent overwhelmed him. And the fight ended with LaMotta on the ropes, couldn't defend himself. They had to stop it. Now, LaMotta joked in later years. He said, you know, I believe the ref did Ray a favor because he was throwing so many punches. About another couple of seconds, I think he was just going to collapse from hitting me so much. He put all the weight on De Niro for the later scenes. And then when filming wrapped, he took the weight off. He was able to do it. He was able to take the weight off. And I believe the next movie he made was a pretty good mystery with Robert Duvall, if I'm not mistaken, called True Confessions. And you can see that De Niro was not quite back at the Jake LaMotta level weight, but if he didn't lose all 60, he lost a lot. He lost about 50. Now, another transformation that De Niro made, which got a lot of play at the time, but when you think about it, wasn't that crazy of a transformation. But 1991 saw two big movies, where the lead actor, or in one case, actress, made a transformation to play the role. Now, Terminator 2 in 1991 had Linda Hamilton coming back as Sarah Connor, the star of the first Terminator. She manages to fight off Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800. In Terminator 2, she is now a hardened warrior. She knows the future is coming. She believes humanity is doomed. And she's in a mental institution and can't even protect her son. She's screwed. Linda Hamilton made a transformation, but it was a transformation within normal parameters. She didn't go from a woman who was, let's say, just like a normal 120 pounds or whatever she might have been, and then suddenly diesel at 130 or 140. Her weight didn't change that much, but she put on a little muscle and she had the little kind of shoulder caps, but again, within normal parameters. She looked completely different than she did in the first movie, which was 7 years prior, and that people were shocked. Like, holy shit, she looks amazing. Well, you could say she didn't look amazing. She looked like somebody who was a little bit off, or somebody who knew that the world was going to end, and I even know the day, fucker, or whatever. De Niro, in the next movie he did with Scorsese after Goodfellas, boy, they worked together a lot. They did so much great work. It was a remake of a movie from the 60s, which some purists, and I find this hard to believe because I don't share this opinion, actually prefer to the Scorsese version, J. Lee Thompson's original Cape Fear, which, if we're being honest, killer cast, Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum. Now, Scorsese being Scorsese, with the deep appreciation of film history, he cast both Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum in small roles in his version of Cape Fear. That was not an accident. In much the same way that Sylvester Stallone, 15 years after Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry, cast two of the main actors in that film, Rennie Santoni, who plays Dirty Harry's partner, Gonzalez, and Andrew Robinson, who played the Scorpio Killer, cast both of them in Cobra. That was Sly's way of paying tribute, of appreciating the history, the movie he was doing, which was in the same ballpark. I would argue that Marion Cobretti's a lot dirtier than Dirty Harry, but that's beside the point. De Niro in Cape Fear, and he had made a number of movies, some of which were okay, like he had just come off Awakenings, which is fantastic movie if you haven't seen it. It's a medical drama with De Niro and Robin Williams. It is a great movie. And I believe De Niro was nominated. Yeah, he was. He was definitely nominated. He didn't win. But De Niro was doing a lot. He was working a lot back then. Angel Heart, maybe my favorite De Niro performance, outside of Taxi Driver. Angel Heart, that was in the 80s. But he was working. He did Stanley and Iris with Jane Fonda. Not so good. But Cape Fear, he plays the same character that Mitchum played in the original. And Mitchum was a very distinctive performer. You could say so was Gregory Peck. But he was not really that intimidating. And I got to be honest, if I'm just watching and I don't know any of the context, and I look at Gregory Peck, circa early 60s, and I look at Robert Mitchum, looks to me like Gregory could stuff him into a garbage can. I'm not seeing a physical threat here. What they did in Cape Fear, De Niro playing the convict, ex-con, who has an axe to grind with not the people who put him in prison, but his attorney who kind of railroaded him. He fixed evidence. He tilted the outcome because he knew that De Niro's Max Cady had done it. Well, you know what? That's not okay. Yes, the guy deserved to go to prison, but you took an oath, and this is not okay. So that's basically the setup. But De Niro, despite being a much smaller man than Nick Nolte is a larger man. De Niro, they said he used kind of, like power factor training where he was doing short range movements and a lot of negatives. He didn't get huge. This was not Mickey Rourke in the wrestler level stuff. He got bigger and more impressive. He had fake tattoos. They looked real. Definitely sold it perfectly. Whoever did that did a great job. But De Niro looked intimidating. And the fact that you knew he was an ex-con, there was the fear factor. But because of his physical self, how he looked, he's certainly more intimidating than he even was in Raging Bull, where he was cut, but he's a smaller guy. Because there's a scene in Cape Fear, I'm sorry, I'm going to give this one scene away, where he is attacked by 3 toughs, and it does not take him long to dial them up. And it's believable because of how he looks. Okay, he's an ex-convict, and you look at what his torso looks like. This is not somebody you'd ever want to fuck with. So that was another movie that De Niro made it, to a lesser extent, of course, than Raging Bull, and psychologically, to a lesser extent than what he did for Taxi Driver. But the transformation helped to sell the film. Because if De Niro plays that at his usual 150 pounds, the intimidation factor, the fear factor, it's not the same. And the movie is better for his taking this preparation very seriously. Now, if you move ahead to more contemporary films and actors who also underwent transformations. Now, everybody loves, I shouldn't say everybody, most people, when they think of Wyatt Earp, they think of Tombstone, and they think of Val Kilmer, who I absolutely love. That is a guy that Generation X has been rooting for all along, and with his health issues, seeing him in Top Gun Maverick, even with his struggles. What can I say? I love Val Kilmer. Even though he was difficult to work with in certain movies, he was almost like an actor version of Kubrick, wanting to do a shit ton of takes. He's the kind of guy who changed his sweater 30 times when they were shooting the poster for The Saint. The poster! They say he kept changing his sweater. He said, no, we got to try a different turtle. No, I don't like it. No, don't. No. Perfectionist. Val Kilmer in Tombstone is probably his most, my 2 guns, 1 for each of you. Or his most famous line and the title of his autobiography, I'm your Huckleberry. Dennis Quaid, another actor I adore, and an actor famous for his physique and fitness. He's pushing 70 now, and he still is ripped. Dennis Quaid was in the Kevin Costner, Lawrence Kasdan version of Wyatt Earp, which is called Wyatt Earp. It's funny that the Wyatt Earp movie that Kilmer's in is called Tombstone, and the Wyatt Earp movie that Costner, Kasdan, and Dennis Quaid made is called Wyatt Earp. And it's kind of a running gag in the movie that Dennis Quaid, and the reason why I brought this up, Dennis Quaid plays Doc Holliday. In this context, Val Kilmer plays Doc Holliday in Tombstone. But Dennis Quaid, it's a different performance. It's set at a different angle. And he has like a thing that he does where he keeps calling Wyatt Earp by his full name. He doesn't call him Wyatt. He doesn't call him Earp. He keeps calling him, and here's my Dennis Quaid impersonation, Wyatt Earp, Wyatt Earp. And finally, Costner is almost talking as the audience, saying, listen, either call me Wyatt or call me Earp. I don't remember if he actually, in fact, does change what he calls him. But Dennis Quaid, a man who was already lean and mean. You look at him in movies like Flesh and Bone with James Caan and his wife at the time, Meg Ryan. Their son, Jack Quaid, Meg Ryan. Flesh and Bone, Undercover Blues with Kathleen Turner, Postcards from the Edge with Meryl Streep. He is shredded in that movie. Man, that guy's physique, fantastic. So he's already fit as a fiddle. The guy's already got a 6-pack or an 8-pack. And Lawrence Kasdan says, Den, I know you're in shape, or words that we don't know the exact quotes. This wasn't on Twitter in 1993. Can you just lose a little bit of weight? Quaid did his version of method eating acting, I guess, and he lost 40 pounds. He didn't have 40 pounds to lose. He barely had 10, barely had 5. When you watch Wyatt Earp just for Dennis Quaid, just for how ghastly and ghostly he looks, a man who was always lean and mean now looks like a walking corpse. But I really like that movie. Gene Hackman, in support, plays the father. Even though Tombstone is more entertaining, love Sam Elliott, I love Kurt Russell, the supporting cast, Michael Biehn, everybody in there, even Jason Priestley. Everyone is terrific in Tombstone. It's a fun movie. Wyatt Earp is an epic, and I really like it. It definitely would make my top 10 favorite Westerns. And I know most people, it's a piece of shit. It's slow. It is slow, but I wasn't bored. I was never bored, and I do prefer it to Tombstone. But yeah, Quaid, this is one, he did it on his own. He didn't go on a medically supervised diet. Even that can backfire. He lost all this weight, and I remember him telling a story that after filming Wrapped, and he was assured, see, this is a thing, Stallone ran into this problem with Copland where he gained all that weight and was so uncomfortable, he took it off as fast as he could, and then he was needed for reshoots. That is always a potential pitfall. But in the case of Wyatt Earp, Quaid had it on a very high level of confidence. There weren't going to be any reshoots. Kasdan was ready, and the footage was fine, and it was extremely unlikely. So he wanted to put the weight back on. This is not Stallone saying, oh my God, I'm a fat fuck. Everybody's making fun of me. I'm supposed to be ripped. Quaid needed to put some weight on because he was about this close to being, hospitalization level. So he said, I bought 2 cream pies. Maybe it was 1 cream pie and 1 cheesecake. He said, I was going to have a slice. I ate both of them in one sitting. And I got so sick from that because he'd been eating, almost nothing, thought he was going to die. Luckily, he survived. And he would say he did not suffer any permanent damage from, the incredible stress he put his little body through. Again, you have a 160-pound guy dropping 30 to 40 pounds or 165. It's not going to be fun for somebody 250 to drop to 210, but in almost all cases, the level of stress on the body is not the same. And, he was fully committed to the part. That's what he was doing. So in a kind of comedic vein, in the same year as Wyatt Earp, Rosie O'Donnell, of all people, I bet you didn't think Rosie O'Donnell's name was going to come up. Rosie O'Donnell made a movie based on it's amazing. Anne Rice had 2 movies that come out in the same year in 94, Interview with the Vampire and Exit to Eden, which was a not really good kind of screwballish type comedy with Dan Aykroyd, among others. And the movie was pretty much a bomb. Not a great adaptation of the book. But Rosie lost a lot of weight for that role. And this is from a totally different angle because Rosie O'Donnell was a stand-up comic who got into movies. She didn't get into movies because of her looks. She got into movies because she was funny and people thought she was funny. And in Another Stakeout, I would argue that she's the highlight of the film. She got Exit to Eden because of the work that she did with Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez in the sequel to the original Stakeout. It's not as good as the first one, but again, actors run into trouble. And Rosie O'Donnell torture dieted herself, again, not medically supervised. She torture dieted herself to lose 40, maybe even been more, to get in shape for Exit to Eden. And there was a scene in the movie, I'm not saying this in a judgmental way, there's a scene in the movie, at least one, where her character is lingerie, bondage gear. The movie deals with this kind of S&M island. The movie was not good. It was terrible. But when that film wrapped, now Rosie O'Donnell didn't do what Dennis Quaid did. She didn't say, I can't wait to put the weight back on. She was eating 800 calories a day and exercising like a demon to lose that weight. She was not doing this in a healthful way. So when filming wrapped, she went back to a normal life. She wasn't eating cheesecake and cream pie. She was just doing what she was normally doing. And she slowly started to put the weight back on. And when they called her for reshoots, they said something like, why couldn't you stay where you were? And she was like, fuck you. And I don't blame her. She's like, it wasn't my goal in life to be an overweight person, go screw off. So they had to do reshoots and kind of do like what with Stallone, but in a different way, where they had to kind of shoot around the fact that she was now heavier and they had to try to match the shots. Easier said than done. But one actor that everybody knows has done intense transformations is Christian Bale, who just celebrated his 50th birthday 2 days ago. And also, I should quickly point out, Matt Damon for Courage Under Fire. It was recently in the news that he got very sick. He was another guy who was already slender and dropped 40 pounds to play, Corporal Ilario or Colonel Ilario? I don't remember, I'm not sure. But he lost a lot of weight and really looked like he was dying. And that was kind of the point. His character had been traumatized by the Gulf War. And he just lost the weight. He didn't have any help. And he said it took a while for his appetite, his sense to come back. But ultimately, he was okay. But what I'm going to close on, and this might take a while, is Christian Bale, who is, to me, an extraordinary talent, all the way back to Spielberg's Empire of the Sun, which I will die on this hill. It is the greatest performance ever given by a child actor, as Jim Graham, or Jamie, if you prefer. But Christian Bale has undergone a number of transformations. I don't know if you would consider what he did in American Psycho a transformation, maybe up here, but in the body, he kind of maybe worked out a little differently to be Patrick Bateman, to be somewhat diesel and shredded to the bone at the same time. But what he did, his transformation and recovery, because he had been cast as Batman, and Bale made a movie, a kind of a dramatic thriller called The Machinist in 2004, and Batman Begins, the first of the Nolan trilogy, and a movie that I argue is the best of the Nolan trilogy, and my single favorite Batman movie. As much as I appreciate The Dark Knight, love Heath Ledger, may he rest in peace, Christian Bale was already fit and lost 50 pounds, 60 pounds for The Machinist. And if you have a strong stomach, no pun intended, Google, if you're not familiar with the film, The Machinist, Christian Bale's transformation. He also appears to be on death's door. He lost so much weight. And what he said he did, he was having like a couple of cans of tuna and maybe an apple or two and exercising and forcing himself through it, even though he was probably in ketosis the entire time. He lost this unbelievable amount of weight, looked like a skeleton in human form. I'm not going to say what he really looked like, but you can use your imagination and know what I'm thinking of. He gave everything he had to that role. And to be fair, The Machinist is a very good movie. And Bale's performance works. And the reason why he looks that way, I bought it within the context of the film. But with all of that trauma on his body, he then had to turn around. And he didn't have that much time before the beginning of filming on Batman Begins, which had a summer 2005 release date, kind of as much as it's possible. Nothing is really set in stone, but studios like to say June 22nd, set in stone. So Bale, within a very short time frame, this time I believe he did it with help. He slowly put the weight back on. And as he reached a certain weight, then he began to feel like his usual self. And he worked out. And if you look at his body in Batman Begins, he looks fucking dynamite. You would never know that he had been 120 pounds not that long before. It's seamless. Nobody would know if they didn't know, like that kind of thing. And because Bruce Wayne is young, he's probably supposed to be in his late 20s, maybe he's 30, but he's strong and he looks like a guy that could take the average criminal and manhandle him just on pure physical strength, not on all of the gadgetry of the Batman costume and the armor, but he looks like a guy who can take care of himself. And in the world of the movie, he learns how to take care of himself thanks to Ra's al Ghul and the fantastic Liam Neeson. But then in terms of other Bale transformations, and there's actually a story with him, American Hustle, he put on a lot of weight and looked like shit. I should also point out the supporting actor Oscar win for The Fighter. He really made himself look like terrible, like I hate to say it, like a drug-addled. He lost a lot of weight for that role. He looked horrendous. But American Hustle, he grew a gut. It wasn't as extreme as De Niro in Raging Bull, but he grew a gut and he looked like shitty with the beard and everything. And there's the funny story from that movie is that De Niro was cast in a cameo as I think a crime boss. And when he came to the set and he saw an actor he didn't recognize sitting in Christian Bale's chair, it didn't click that this was Christian Bale. It didn't look anything like him. And De Niro walked over and introduced himself. Hey, I'm Bobby. I don't think we've met. And from underneath the makeup, Bale thought De Niro was playing a joke on him. He goes, Bobby, it's me, it's Christian. And De Niro was so embarrassed. But that showed the transformation and the fact that under all that makeup and with that gut, it didn't look like Christian Bale if you didn't know that it was really him. Arguably Bale's most incredible transformation and then reformation was when he played Dick Cheney in the 2017 film Vice. I think that was the biggest weight gain that he underwent. I want to say he gained 70. And when that was over, turned right around and didn't have that much time before starting work on really one of the best films of 2019, Ford versus Ferrari with Matt Damon. He of the nearly getting himself hospitalized because his diet was so extreme for Courage Under Fire in 1996. But if you look at Bale in Ford versus Ferrari and you say, holy shit, he was so fat in the movie Vice. And look at how trim, look at how he's grizzled, but he looks healthy. His cheeks are normal. He doesn't look drawn like he did in The Machinist. Like Bale has mastered, and I hope he never does it again now that he's 50, but mastered the ability of transformation and reformation and somehow managing to seem as if he has regained his health in full. And because that's really, they're just people. Yes, they're making a shit ton of money, but I don't say, well, he made $5 million, it's okay if he's permanently impaired. No. In the same way that when football players play a game in 0 degrees and end up losing fingers and toes, well, they're making a lot of money. No, not okay. Don't wish ill upon anybody, even if it's just for a role, and nobody said that he had to go that far. Having said that, it does get more difficult to do these kind of juggling acts with one's body as one gets older. And Matt Damon was very young when he did it for Courage Under Fire, and Bale for The Machinist was in his late 20s. And I, as a fan, hope that he, and certainly none of the other people I mentioned, but I hope that he does not do anything like that again. No more gaining a 50 and losing a 50, because now you are 50, as I am 50. And going up and down in weight, it's arguably not healthy when you're in your 20s, sure as fuck is not healthy when you're 50 or over. And with that, we've reached the end of episode 75 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this evening in New York. If you're checked out episode 75 on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, click like, subscribe, turn on the notifications, or if you caught the audio version on Spotify, iTunes, or the other platforms, haven't done so already, click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 76 real soon. Peace.